that's an old way that people do. Well, some people still do it with some virtuosity, but that's certainly not necessary. What I mean by underlying structures are ones which come again and again and will influence the way in which you translate the Tibetan. I want in particular to talk about compound structures. And then I'll talk about a number of idioms, Sanskritisms, Sanskrit idioms that come again and again in Tibetan. And I'll give a couple of examples of this type of thing. Let's first talk about compounds. Sanskrit proceeds with compounds of varying length, at least 2 members, sometimes up to 8, 10 members. And Sanskrit grammarians thought long and hard about these things. It's something which you have to analyze. You have to have a kind of an analytic approach to these things. That is, it's not just purely intuitive. In some cases, of course, or many cases, intuition will suffice, especially when something is very, very well known. But in other cases, you really do have to do an explicit analysis. And you have to say, what kind of compound is this? Now, in Sanskrit, what happens is that it's the last member of the compound, which usually is the most important other than the coordinate of compounds. And the other members don't exhibit their case relationships. So if we take sorry, we're having a few little technical glitches here, but as I was saying, in Sanskrit, the compound doesn't show its the case relationships. In the case of a simple compound, you can often just reproduce that by an English simple compound that doesn't show the case relationships either. But when things are a bit more controversial or a bit more obscure or longer, then one has to interpret and one has to supply the case relationships. That is essentially what Indian commentators did, and often it had philosophical differences. It's also what Tibetan translators did. That is one of the very good reasons why one has to know Tibetan in order to work on Indian texts, is because the Tibetans often give us a way through very, very long and involved compounds. Now, a compound like waste paper basket, which is an intuitive one, you can analyze it. In other words, it should withstand analysis. That is, what's your understanding of waste paper basket? Well, it's a basket for paper which is waste. In other words, you can see that we have 3 words there. We have a link between waste paper, which is itself a compound, and basket. The relationship between basket and waste paper is a dative case, for. And the relationship of waste to paper is a description. That is, it's a further specification of what kind of paper. It's paper which is waste. Okay, so we have a type of an analysis, and this is what I'm going to get into, of compounds that can be iterated, especially when the compound is long. Can be and has to be iterated. I think the main lesson for translators in this is that you have to be able to justify your understanding of a compound according to 4 Indian grammatical understandings, 4 possibilities. Now this is a compound, whether it's a Tibetan compound, whether it's a German compound, whether it's an English compound, whether it's a Sanskrit compound, doesn't matter. One of the beauties of the Sanskrit grammatical analysis is you can also just apply it to German. So we have 4, and they can be iterated. Now, what are the 4? Now, many people amongst you will no doubt already know these things, some won't, but I'll just quickly give them with their Tibetan translations. We have a coordinative compound, a dvandva, a dechewa. The second one is a determinative compound, a dependent determinative compound, a tatpurusha, a dekebo. Dekebo is an example of one. The third is a descriptive determinative compound, a karmadare, or a leitziba in Tibetan. And the fourth is what we can call an exocentric compound, a possessive compound, an adjectival compound, however you want to put it. And this is also an example of it. Duma bahuvrihi. Okay, let's go through them one by one. The dechewa, or dvandva, the coordinative compound, is something that you really don't have many examples of in English. You have to really look around for them. One of the fellows that I went to dinner with last night came up with one in English, tractor trailer. A tractor trailer is both a tractor and a trailer. You can find a few others. Bittersweet is both bitter and sweet. 67 is 60 and 7, 28, and so forth. But these are relatively rare in English. They're not very rare in Sanskrit at all. And they're the types of things which are rendered in Tibetan by done. So you'll have A done B done C. These are coordinative compounds. A and B and C. They're in a sense the easiest ones, although they're relatively rare in English. They're not rare at all in our texts, and they stand out unambiguously with the presence of the done, of the conjunct, the conjunction in Tibetan. Now let's move on to these two, the Tatpurusha and the Karmadarya, which are very common both in English, Tibetan, and Sanskrit. We can call these determinative compounds. A determinative compound being one in which the final element is further defined or specified by what precedes it. So, for example, in English, we would have homemade. It's made at home. There are many things which are made, and homemade stuff is, in a sense, a subset of all the various things that are made. Look at the difference relative to 67. 67 isn't a particular type of 7. 28 isn't a type of an 8. No, it's 20 plus 8. So a determinative compound is one where the preceding element specifies the final one. Now there are 2 different types of determinative compounds. There are what we call dekebo, literally, the man, the servant of that, or of him. And this is an example of one, in the sense that the case